India Legal, stories that count.
Welcome to another edition of India Legal. Today's subject is the film currently drawing a lot of public attention, controversy, and excoriation, as well as praise from all sides of the political spectrum, and has become a raging controversy in the public debate. The film is called Kashmir Files. It is currently running in most cinema halls and is being promoted by the government as a must-see film for anybody trying to understand what happened to the Kashmiri Pandits during their migration from the valley, which has been their home for hundreds of years back in the 1990s. Well, one of the reasons that this film has attracted the kind of attention that it has all over the country and abroad is because apparently it rouses a lot of basic raw emotion and passions. A lot of films do that, especially when they deal with controversial subjects involving hatred between communities, civil wars, fights, bloody battles. But in this particular case, the film has attracted more than its share of attention because it is being heavily promoted by the government in power. People are being encouraged to see it. Government officials are being given holidays to go and see the film. And the government in states, for example, where the BJP is in power, are even asking for tax exemption for the showing of this film. Now, this has obviously become what is known as a state-sponsored event. It is also being referred to by the top leadership of this country, and in a sense, it represents a trend in this country which points towards the nationalization of cinema, a nationalization of the cinema industry, because the kind of support, the government official machinery coming in support of a privately made film, it gives it the stamp of the state. And once any venture gets the stamp of the state and an official recognition of the state, it virtually becomes a property of the state, especially when it is being promoted in the way that it has been. It is being ballyhooed all over as one of the greatest films ever made. Is this the greatest film ever made? Should this be promoted in the way that it is being promoted by the government? Well, my answer is that a film needs to stand or fall on its own merits. And if it contains the truth will live on. If it has got falsehoods, other media, other films can be made to counter the message contained in this film. Now, the point is that the film deals with an important subject. There's no doubt about the fact that in the 90s, Kashmiri Pandits, Hindus, all of them Hindus, were actually chased and hounded out of their homes by terrorists who were mostly from the majority community in that state. The events of that terrible decade are not unheard of. They're well known. In fact, I was very active as an editor at that time for India Today in covering this exodus of the Pandits, and I was severely critical of it, and I excoriated both the terrorists who had taken over Kashmir's so-called Kashmiriyat movement, as well as the government's failure to do anything concrete for these poor migrants. They were put in camps all over the country, and hardly any government in power, whether in Delhi or in the states, cared about their plight. But to see them now exploited in this way in a film, years and years later, when governments actually fail to ameliorate their plight and to resettle them is an extremely unsettling matter for this country. The difference between this film and the coverage that this matter received, this exodus of the pundits or their forced expulsion from their homes in the media at the time that was happening, is stark. Most of us covering that period, we did not ignore this phenomenon, but we did not turn the war against Kashmiri terrorists backed by Pakistan into a war or a total condemnation of the Kashmiri people or even the Kashmiri Muslims as such. Because all Kashmiri Muslims are not terrorists, and many of them came at the expense of their own lives and their homes to the help of these Kashmiris, who were the Kashmiri Pandits who were being forced out of their homes. I stress once again, there's a big difference between armed terrorists and goons, especially in Kashmir, the majority community who belonged to the majority community religion, which was Islam, and who were most of them backed by Pakistan. There's a big difference between these goons as well as ordinary Kashmiris who had opted to stay within the Indian Union and wave the Indian flag and become a part of India. We recognize this difference, just as we recognize the difference and the danger in Punjab during the days of the Khalistani movement in the 80s in Punjab, where very nearly the war against Khalistani terrorists was turned into a war against the Sikh community at large, which alienated the Punjab until we made a mid-course correction. The mid-course correction at the time the Congress government was in power was ultimately what led to peace in Punjab again, where the real separatists and terrorists were separated and from the ordinary peace-loving Punjabis and Sikhs, and ultimately matters came to some kind of normalcy in Punjab. In Kashmir, unfortunately, that has not happened. We have continued to treat ordinary Kashmiris who have suffered terribly at the hands of Pakistani invaders right since 1947, 1948, and later on, even in 1965, as well as the Pakistani-sponsored militants right now, who have made the Muslims who reside in the valley as much an object of their terror as they have the Kashmiri Pandits. What this film apparently does, and I haven't seen it, and I'm not talking about the merits of this film or how good or bad it is. I'm simply talking about the atmosphere which it has generated because of the unusual interest that the government has shown in promoting it. Is that already within cinema halls, apparently, the passions rise high as this film ends. And even in the middle of the film, people actually get up and start shouting anti-minority slogans, which some of which are too horrible to repeat. And there's always a danger that when this happens and communal hatred showing the Muslims as a group of nothing but heartless terrorists bent upon completely destroying the Hindu civilization, the danger to communal peace and communal harmony is great indeed. There's a great website, educational website called history.org, which I think you should read, and there's a wonderful article in there which I want to refer to and read from right now, showing the use of film as propaganda. That during World War I, the British discovered the power of films to shape public opinion Actually, the Soviets made a similar discovery in the 1920s. Joseph Goebbels learnt from both. He began with the newsreel short film-based news reports that in those days were played before feature films. In Germany, those newsreels showed the nation as the Nazis wanted it to be seen, rich and powerful in comparison to its neighbors. But propaganda was not limited to newsreels. Other kinds of movies made in Nazi Germany also expressed the government's political and social views. Some films, like Triumph of the Will by director Leni Riefenstahl, glorified Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. The documentary film style film was shot at 1934 Nazi Party Congress and rally in Nuremberg. American journalist William Shirer was in Germany at the time, and that rally was his first. He describes it this way. Like a Roman emperor, Hitler rode into this medieval town, that's Nuremberg, sundown, past solid phalanxes of wildly cheering Germans who packed the narrow streets. Tens of thousands of swastika flags brought out the Gothic beauties of the place, and the facades of the old houses, the gabled roofs, the streets hardly wider than alleys are a sea of brown and black uniforms. Here was how the plot was summarized in that film. Clean-shaven and dressed like a gentleman, the Jew Sus Oppenheimer contrives to be appointed finance minister to the Duke of Württemberg. Matching one another in treachery, the court Jew and minister Sus Oppenheimer and his secretary outbid one another in tricks and intrigue to bleed the people of Württemberg. The Jew Sus Oppenheimer violates the beautiful Dorothea Sturm, an outrageous act which confirms the extent of his guilt. Jew, hands off women. That was the message. In another anti-Semitic film, The Ewig Jude, The Eternal Jew, was praised as a documentary but contained such blatant lies that part of it had to be omitted from the version shown in other countries. Officials feared the hostile tone might damage the film's credibility. Marion Pritchard, then a graduate student in the Netherlands, recalled seeing the film. Here is how Marion Pritchard describes it. We went to see this movie and sat and made smart remarks all the way through and laughed at it because it was so outrageous. And yet, when we came out of the movie, one of my Gentile friends told me, I wish I hadn't seen it. I know that it was all ridiculous and propaganda, but for the first time in my life, I have a sense of them and us, Jews and Gentiles. I'm going to do everything I can to help them, but I wish I didn't have this feeling. Now, here are some connected questions that this website asks. 1. How did the Nazis use film to create an image of their ideal national community? How did they use the film to create an image who would be excluded from this community? 2. What did Marion Pritchard's friend mean when he said, I know that it was all ridiculous propaganda, but for the first time in my life, I have a sense of them and us, Jews and Gentiles? Well, how do you explain that comment or her statement? Why does film have the power to engage our emotions? How do television shows or films of today help shape an ideal image of ourselves and our societies? Give us some examples. 4. What is a documentary film? How is a documentary film different from a propaganda film? If possible, watch a clip from The Triumph of the Will. Based on the description of this reading or on the clip you viewed, do you think The Triumph of the Will should be considered a documentary film? Question 5. While reading highlights films, with this reading highlights films with a direct connection to propaganda, the German industry was very active during the Nazi years, also creating so-called entertainment movies like romances and comedies. In what ways might those also have had a role as propaganda? What purpose can entertainment in the media serve for a government? These are questions for all of you to ponder as the film Kashmir Files stays on the screens. This is Inderjit Badhwar. Until next time.
India Legal, stories that count.